Hi Class 4, I am here with the next chapter of Stig of the Dump, and we are on to chapter 5, which is Skinned and Buried. There we go. Let's see what Barney and Stig are up to today. Barney was up the elm tree. It was the one that grew very close to Grandmother's house. It had a swing on one of the lower branches, and near the top there was a hole where the jackdaws usually made a nest each year. Barney had climbed up to see how they were getting on this spring, and they had already laid one egg. He climbed higher among the springy branches at the top and clung there to let the wind blow him to and fro. He could see the house almost below him, and the garden with a few daffodils and crocuses showing, and the wood and the copses where the trees still showed their bones but were beginning to be covered with the new green leaves. He heard Lou's voice somewhere about the house calling for him, but he didn't answer. I bet she can't find me, he thought, and grinned to himself. Then he saw his grandmother and Lou in the yard, going out to the car with shopping baskets. Grandmother called, "Barney, where are you?" Barney chuckled to himself. He could see them, so they could see him if they really looked. But Grandmother and Lou got into the car and drove off, and he could see it going along the lane towards the village. They'd gone off shopping and left him. It wasn't there. He was so cross he nearly fell off his branch. Then he thought it was no good trying to stamp your feet when they're wedged in the fork of a branch, and anyhow, he may as well stay up there instead of going shopping. He'd really rather be up a tree in the wind than go shopping. He could see plough fields with a tractor crawling over the bare earth pulling a harrow. He could see black and white cows on the pasture. He could see chicken houses, and those very, very small bits of yellow like grains of sand running along must be baby chicks. He could see a big black car coming along the lane towards the house. That was funny. It had stopped and pulled off the road into the copse near the chalk pit. He could see two men get out and walk towards the house. They wore dark hats and mackintoshes and didn't look like country people. Had he seen them before? Yes, he had. They'd come to the door once before, and he had answered the doorbell. They'd asked him if his grandmother had got any silver or jewels to sell, and he'd told them that of course grandmother had lots of silver and jewels, but he didn't think she would want to sell them, as she's got some money already. And then grandmother had come out and told them she didn't want to sell anything, thank you, and if she did, she wouldn't sell it on the doorstep, and she seemed quite cross. And now these same men were coming back again. Well, there was nobody at home, and he was still going to stay in his tree. One of the men stayed in the lane, and the other went and knocked on the door. Of course nobody answered. The man knocked again and waited a long time. Then he went round to the back of the door and tried that. It was not locked. The man looked about him, opened the door, and went in. Barney's heart fluttered, and his legs felt funny, as if he had nearly fallen off his branch, though he was clinging on with all his might. That man had gone into Granny's house when he shouldn't have. He must be a thief. He would take all the silver and drive off with it in his car, and Barney was all alone up in this tree, and though he could see the countryside for miles around, he couldn't see a human being except for the tractor driver, fields and fields away. There was no one who could help him. Yes, there was. Barney started climbing down, trying not to be too shaky and excited. He had to go down the side of the tree that was away from the house so that he wouldn't be seen, and the best handholds and the best footholds were on the house side. Barney slipped and slithered the last bit and landed among the bushy twigs that grew out of the bottom of the trunk. He crouched there for a few moments, hoping he had not made too much noise. Then he crawled out and ran as hard as he could across the paddock towards the copse. He scrambled over the fence and lay among the brambles there, panting and looking towards the house. He could see no signs of anybody coming after him, so he got up and plunged through the copse. "Look out! Bluebells and primroses," he thought. "I'm in a hurry." By the time he got down into the pit and along the bottom to Stig's cave, he was quite out of breath. Stig was there all right. There was a strong smell coming from something gluey he was melting on the fire. He was sticking arrowheads onto their shafts and binding them with catgut which he was taking from a broken old tennis racket. He looked all ready for the spring hunting season. "Stig," puffed Barney, "thank goodness you're here. You've got to help. A man's got into Granny's house and I'm sure he's a thief, and he'll take all the silver and jewels and even the money in my money box if he finds it, and it's got 3 and 3pence in it. What are we going to do, Stig?" Stig just grinned in a friendly way, and Barney began to feel hopeless. It was just like when he was trying to explain to Stig about the grown-ups. They just smiled and said, "Really?" And of course Stig didn't speak English. He didn't talk much at all, but he must make him understand. "Enemy!" said Barney fiercely, pointing towards the top of the cliff. "Bad men!" he said, screwing up his face and looking wicked. "Fight 'em, Stig! Shoot 'em! See 'em off, Stig!" he urged, making bow and arrow movements and spear movements with his arms. Stig seemed to get the idea. He grinned more than ever and scowled horribly at the same time. Barney looked round for weapons. Leaning against the wall were a new-looking bow and the arrows that Stig had been making, some spears, an axe, and the horrible-looking club. Barney picked up the bow and arrows and handed them to Stig, but Stig gave them back and took the club instead. "Can I really have the bow and arrows, Stig?" exclaimed Barney. "Gosh, thanks! Come on, we've got to be quick." They ran out to the far end of the pit, and instead of turning right and coming back through the copse to the garden, Barney led the way round into the lane and up the hill towards the house. There at the top, where the lane passed near the chalk cliff, there was a gap where the lorries backed off the road to dump things over the cliff. They found the big black car parked up. And there, coming along the lane, were the two men in raincoats and dark hats, carrying a large suitcase each. Without thinking, Barney fitted an arrow into the bow and shot it. A dark city hat flipped off the head of one of the men and was pinned to the back of the lane by a flint-tipped arrow. The men stopped. Then they saw Barney. "Now then, kid," said the man. "Cut it out. That's dangerous play with bows and arrows." "You're thieves," said Barney. "I know you've got Granny's silver in that suitcase." The man looked at his companion. "Hear that?" he said. "This kid thinks we're thieves. Look, Sonny, we come to look at your Granny's television, didn't we, Sydney? We've got our tools in these here cases, haven't we, Sydney?" "That's right," said Sydney. "Plucky little nipper though, ain't you, Sydney? Looking after his granny's house while she's away, Sonny. I got some toffees for you in the car." "I don't like toffees," said Barney, but he was beginning to feel foolish, and he lowered his bow, which was pointing at the man with another arrow fitted. The man turned round for his hat, which had the arrow stuck through it. He pulled the arrow out, then he looked at the sharp flint tip, and his face went white. "You little horror!" he snarled at Barney. "Where'd you get them things from, eh? You might have killed me. Kill me, you might have done." He broke the arrow across twice and threw the pieces angrily on the ground. "Come here," he said, "and hand over the rest of them things, or there'll be trouble." He came towards Barney with a very nasty expression on his face. Stig had been lurking behind the car, listening to the strange talking and wondering what it was all about. When he saw the man break his precious arrow and come angrily towards Barney, it was enough for him. He let out a sound that was something between a growl and a howl and dashed at the man, raising his horrible club. The two men took one look at this wild figure, dropped their suitcases and ran, with Stig in mad pursuit and Barney running after Stig. "Stig! Stig! Come back!" shouted Barney. "It's all a mistake. They're not bad men. They're not thieves. They came to mend the television." But it was no use. What did Stig know about a television? There was a barbed wire fence at the top of the lane, and the men decided to get over it in the hope of escaping from Stig. As the second one scrambled over, his raincoat got caught in the wire. In a panic, he struggled out of the coat and ran over the field, leaving it on the fence. It was this that saved him from the teeth of Stig's club, because Stig stopped to look at the coat, as if he was not quite sure which part of the man had been left behind. Barney caught up with him and took hold of his arm. "Stig! Stig! You mustn't chase those men," Barney panted. "I thought they were thieves, but they're not. They might tell a policeman, and then there'll be awful trouble." But Stig was looking at the coat. As he turned it about, there was a tinkling sound, and a whole lot of shining things fell out of the pocket onto the ground. Stig pounced on them with wide-open eyes, picking them up and admiring them, turning them to the light. "No, Stig," said Barney. "You can't have them. They're only the man's teaspoons. I expect he was going to have a picnic." "Hey, just wait a minute." Barney pulled Stig by the arm. "Come on," he urged. "We'd better look at those suitcases." They ran back down the lane to where the suitcases were laying. Barney opened one of them. "Golly," he exclaimed. "All Granny's spoons and forks and ladles and things, her jewels and trinkets from the dressing table, one pair of cufflinks belonging to Grandfather, and his own money box." He shook the money box. Did it still sound like 3 shillings and 3p? So they were thieves after all. What should he do now? They might come back to their big black car any time and drive away. How could he stop them? He ran to the car, opened the rear door and looked inside. Under some sacks were more suitcases and bags that clanked when he felt them. Loot from other people's houses. And we will see what Barney decides to do tomorrow. See you then.